like when I go to get on the train, I'm like, there's a lot of snow, and my feet are uncovered.
Yep.
All right, we'll go with PSR Unlucky 13.
That's good. I like that one.
I think it's good.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be 200 OK Boomer, but people got mad at me about that one.
As they should, you ageist fuck.
Did you see a couple, what was it, 2 months ago? I read How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Oh, you figured out how to not be an asshole finally?
Yeah, so working on that. Because then I was like, I'm going to start a project called 200 OK Boomer. Wage was like, didn't you just read this book? Is this really how you win friends? I'm like, no.
You influence people, though. It's neither or.
That was like, so my boss was talking to like Matt and Adam about like Tailwind UI and all that kind of stuff today. And Matt Salford tweeted back like a heart eyes emoji. And I was like, dude, Matt Salford gave you heart eyes. All he does is roll his eyes at me.
Maybe you need to be sending more heart eye emojis to people. And then you'll get them back.
Great bot, just randomly tweeting heart eyes at people.
Yeah, you could set up, a list of keywords. Just the most random list you could possibly come up with.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't going to go to bed anytime soon. I think I know what I'm going to do tonight. All right. So, Woody, is there anything like particular interesting that you're working on that you want to talk about, or just kind of let us ramble and see where it goes?
I've already
interesting things.
So we should probably just ramble and see where it goes.
Like, I know you did some stuff with OpenAPI. You're still involved with the league, aren't you?
Loosely, yeah. I mean, well, everything with the league is pretty loosely these days, and that's okay.
It's very
I still work on the OAuth client from time to time, and I kind of seem to have been doing a lot of review for League CSV off and on over the past couple of years. I don't actually contribute much to it, but do a fair number of reviews for that. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, work stuff we've been working on my work has been building a new product since June of last year. We finally have a customer who's using it. So my open source work has been pretty limited this winter. I would say most of what I've done in terms of open source has just been various bug fixes for OpenAPI related packages because we use them heavily. In particular, we use Middleware that validates requests and responses against OpenAPI specs.
That's cool. What are you doing that in? Like what framework?
We use Slim framework.
That's cool.
Slim and Doctrine and a pile of other packages.
So you're just doing PSR middleware with that, or are you doing anything specific personal? Nice.
No, the middleware package that we use, the OpenAPI package, is a PSR 15 middleware.
Cool.
I mean, there's the middleware component and then there's a validator component. The middleware just kind of hooks it all together.
Right.
Yep.
Nice.
But it's great. Now we're starting to get into a lot of automation stuff, exploring Amazon services, and our new product is running on Amazon Lambda using Brief, which is cool.
Is that how you say that? I've always called it breath.
Brief. I don't know. Breath. Sure.
No, brief makes more sense actually.
I don't know. I mean, it makes sense. It makes sense to me, and saying breath just is a little weird, and yeah. I don't know.
It makes a lot more sense. I've never considered that pronunciation. We tried to get is it Matteo? Is that how you say his name? Try to get him on.
Matteo Napoli.
Yeah, he's booked up for like 6 months, but one day we'll convince him to come on.
Yeah, I think
We're ready to do a time zone and stuff.
Bref or Brief, however we pronounce it, is really taken off for him. It's a really good framework, and the latest update to leverage serverless framework for deployments is really cool. It's almost like JavaScript in terms of running stuff on Lambda now. You can just return a closure with the newest version. Like you can your entry point can be a PHP file that returns a closure, and it will do all the things.
Okay, that's cool.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's very cool. You want to kick us off, Matt, with an intro? We've been chatting for a bit.
Yeah, we've been live for like 5 minutes now, but yeah, sure. Okay. Oh, which one is it? 73?
Yes.
See, someone's fantastic. All right. Welcome to episode 73 of PHP Town Hall. PSR Unlucky 13 is our topic tonight. Joined tonight with very good friend Ben and also our special guest Woody. Guys, how's it going?
Hello. Going good.
Ben, you've had a particular tumultuous week. I hope that you have
Understatement of the year.
Yeah, right. Hopefully you have a drink or 5, like sipping 5.
I have half a one left, so. But it's right behind me. There's extras.
Well, Woody, is this your first time on the Total, or have you been on here before and I just don't know about it?
It's either my first or my second. I can't remember.
Let's quickly scan the website. I don't see you. You're definitely not.
I think my other appearance was on PHP Roundtable.
Oh, rest in peace, Roundtable.
Yeah.
It's actually a much better podcast than this one for anyone listening.
That's because it cares. And I mean, we do too, but to a lesser degree.
We don't even remember who's been on the fucking show before.
Puts his heart into things. We put our livers into it. There you go.
This is a very good point. That's like a perfect slogan.
Mm-hmm.
It is. If we ever get stickers made, that is what we're going to add to it. But so Woody, I mean, like, I think you have like a lot of people probably know your name, but you know this might be like the first time you're hearing your voice or anything like that. You've been involved with the League, with the Fig. You do open API stuff. You had a framework for a little while. You kind of just get around. How does that, like, is that how you planned everything, or you just kind of attach yourself to a project and then watch it die, and then you just keep moving on? And how does this work?
What are you trying to say, Matt?
You're like the closer of the open source projects.
Are you trying to tell me that I'm going to kill Fig? Is that what you're trying to say here?
Honest to God, I think if you did that, thered be a lot of happy people, if we're just going to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, well, wouldn't be me. No, I didn't plan any of it. You know, the framework thing, I was young and stupid and had a lot of ambition and not a lot of responsibility. And so it was really easy to just dedicate all of my free time to reinventing the wheels. And so that worked out for a while in my early 20s. Then I got married and decided to get serious and got a real job, and so the framework kind of died without my endless hours of late nights banging away at the keyboard behind it, and that's okay. Or maybe, as Taylor likes to say, Laravel killed Kohana, but I don't really know what the truth is. So,
You said that? Do we have to return to sponsorship money now? Is that all? But by that logic, though, I mean, didn't he kill CodeIgniter, and that thing's back from the dead? So basically, by the logic I'm getting at here, he killed CodeIgniter. That shit came back. Kohana's dead. You know, I'm just. It could be fine.
Yeah.
When is the next 13?
I mean, it's not. It's the funny thing about Kohana is it's actually not really dead. Like, I know of at least 3 companies that are successful startup businesses that are still running on Kohana. So
now, like the most interesting story I have about Kohana isn't I never used it, but the first ever Atlanta PHP and actually PHP user group I ever went to, you were one of the presenters there with I don't remember who the other guy was, but he was from Africa and he was using Kohana as a way to create a response network. Things like natural disasters or any kind of like calamity type response situation. And that was like my first introduction to like frameworks and understanding anything about open source and all that kind of stuff. So that was like 5 years ago or something like that. And I still remember you got the free PHP Storm license and you were just like, no, I use Vim. And Chris was like, are you sure? And he's like, yeah, no, I use Vim. And I was like, that guy.
Yeah, that guy doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. That's what you were thinking.
I was like, what is Vim? And then I haven't been on quit since.
The good news is I've grown up and I use PHP Storm now. Even though I'm slightly convinced that it's killing my computer.
I mean, it probably is, but we can cut that last part out and send the first part to JetBrains and hopefully.
All right, that sounds great.
I am shameless. I need money. The stock market is down, and I have things to buy. But so, I mean, to go back, I mean, I think one question a lot of people have, like when everyone says you shouldn't reinvent the wheel, but it is good to kind of build projects to learn. When you're building and maintaining and growing Kohana before you decided to move on from it, what were some of the lessons that you really kind of took away from the maintainership, the building, and the community and all that?
One, never try to write an ORM. Two, never try to write an ORM. Three, maybe don't always try to reinvent the wheel.
So use an existing ORM.
Yeah, definitely use an existing ORM, or don't use an ORM is probably even better. I don't know. I think the biggest thing is just like to be responsive to what people need. I mean, if Laravel is any indication of success, it's not, granted, I didn't have a proper computer science education, and I still don't. But Kohana was successful because I would write things that I needed. And so that like focus on developer experience and like doing something that just made sense, whether or not it was super technically correct, was apparently really valuable. And Laravel is right on top of that too. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in Laravel that people who are academic, look at it and go, why does Laravel do this? Well, I mean, it's the most successful framework out there because it focuses on making things really simple and understandable, at least from a high level perspective. From somebody who's reading the code and writing the code, it makes a lot of sense. So I think that's super valuable. It's just, I would say if anything for open source projects, it's like you find a niche and fill it. And Kohana just came along at the right time where it was during the shift from PHP 4 to PHP 5, and people were just starting to really understand object-oriented programming in PHP, and the language finally supported it in a reasonable way. And Kohana was at the forefront of that for a little while. And so I think that's where we were successful.
So you mentioned the ORM a couple times. Is that like the biggest pain in the ass with the framework, or why is that your advice?
I mean, the ORM itself works fine. It's as with any ORM, you just have to be really, really careful about relationships and lazy loading. And the Kohana ORM was honestly pretty good. It just wasn't very good at allowing you to do things in an efficient way when it came to complex stuff. And so it was really easy to end up in situations where you would have, 50 queries to display a page because of lazy loading stuff and not very good tooling around including stuff up front or combining queries. One of my first major consulting gigs was for this company that they had launched a product and it got super successful, and they were running four dedicated 4-core servers with 16 gigs of RAM in order to have enough power to run their website with something like, I don't know, 10,000, 50,000 customers. It wasn't that many customers, but the memory requirements were insane because the database was so inefficient.
Wow.
Yep.
Huh. Well, so you moved on for Kahana. Did you move on from it officially, or did it just kind of peter out, or what happened there?
It kind of petered out for a while. I went to work for a company that didn't use Kohana. I didn't have any time for consulting, so I just didn't really do much with it. There were a couple of people that were maintainers, and they carried it on for a little while, and then they kind of also started to move away from it, had jobs that were doing other things. And eventually, I moved on from that job, but at that point I was like, other things have come along, other frameworks. It's been 3 years and other frameworks have made a lot more progress and are way better choices. And so I didn't care to put the effort in to bring it up to speed, and eventually just kind of left it in bare bones maintenance mode for a couple of years. And then somebody came along and said that they wanted to take it over and upgrade it to make it compatible with PHP 7 and do some improvements. And I said, all right, great. Let me make you an admin of the organization and just hand the whole thing off. And so that's what I did.
Oh, nice. So how'd you move from that into the Fig? How'd you get started there? Or I guess you went back to the League, right?
Yeah, the next thing was League. I was working for a company that was going to use OAuth logins and wanted to support several different logins and social connections. I think Google was high up on that list, and maybe Facebook was one of them, and LinkedIn. And so I looked around and I was like, well, there's this OAuth package. That's awesome. And I started using it, and it's like, wow, this could be a lot better. And so I started submitting pull requests. And at that point, Ben Ramsey was basically running the whole OAuth, the League OAuth package. And he was like, you've got way more time to, you obviously care about this a lot more than I do right now. It does what I need it to, but not what you need it to. So have at it. And eventually made me a maintainer of some of those packages, along with Sammy K, who does another set of them. So we all kind of worked on that for a while, and now it's been pretty solid for a while. And not a lot of changes happening in that world. And then League or Fig. How did I get into Fig? Somewhere around PSR 7, late into the game on PSR 7, and then just spending a lot of time thinking about PSR 7 and how to leverage that effectively, which led me into the world of middleware, and then the natural evolution of that. So we started, myself and a couple other people started talking a lot about middleware and advocating for a new PSR for that. And I became the editor of PSR 15. And then there was an obvious need for PSR 17 HTTP factory. When you're talking about middleware and you have to create responses, you have to have some way to do that without depending on a specific implementation. So that was the next obvious candidate. And I did editing for both of those, and that process took years. which is not what I was
Literally.
expecting. Yeah. And so, but I guess I was reasonably good at it because then they voted me on for core committee. And now I haven't. And then it's not a lot has been happening since then. I was not super involved with the last PSR that came out. I think it was PSR 14 event stuff. Although I'm a big fan of it, I use it now. And now it's been kind of quiet. There's PSR 13 seems to be kind of floating around and maybe getting some steam again. So we'll see.
So what all is required of you to be like the editor of PSR? Like how much work would you say is really involved for that kind of thing?
A lot more than you would think. We took the approach, and I'm not sure this is a good approach, but the approach that we took was basically to write what we thought the implementation should be in code, and hosted that on GitHub. And then just had pull request after pull request and issue and tons of feedback and discussion. And then ultimately, the closer we got to it, like seeming to be pretty stable, the more that we could say like no to pull requests and issues and be like, nope, we're not going to do that. Then the discussion kind of moved over to the FIG mailing list and dealt with a second round of feedback, less so from the general public and more from people that had actually, people that were more directly involved with FIG and had been through the process before. So it's a committee, and it is designed by committee in a lot of ways. There's a lot of smart people making really smart arguments and trying to figure out what the best way forward is and try to keep an open mind, but not constantly be bike shedding is, I don't know. It's a weird diplomatic process.
So that process, like let's do the code implementation and then let's get PRs on that and really think it through as code first. That seems reasonable, right? Because you do want to avoid this case where you think it through in theory and you put out like an interface, but then that doesn't work in practice. So that does make sense to me. Do you think there's a better way to do it in the future, or do you think that worked well?
I think it worked pretty well. The only thing that was problematic is that we started with one idea, which was how middleware essentially worked in PHP land before that, where you would have, how did it work? Now, it's been such a long time. You had a request and a response object that was passed to every single middleware, and they were closures. Anyway, it was called double pass middleware, and it was basically closures, and there was no hard interface on what on the closure that was called to continue the middleware.
Yeah, like on top of my head, I'm remembering it as similar to like Express, like Node Express, right?
Yes,
where you have like a next kind of thing that you just pass through whatever and it does whatever it wants.
Correct. That was where we started, and then we transitioned from that to what you see today, more or less. I mean, some names have changed, but the single pass style. And that transition was hard for people to take because people didn't understand that, like, this is not code to be used in production. This is just like a reference implementation with tests. Like, there's no reason to actually be relying on this. But people jumped on the bandwagon early, and then we're cranky about that massive change and break in compatibility. And even that, like, even just the discussion, whether or not we had done code, but that discussion around like Express style versus what we ended up with was the most contentious part of middleware, for sure.
Understandable. I guess that would be a downside of the code, right? If you have the code, people might use the code.
yes, if you have the code, people will use it. Whether or not, doesn't matter how many warnings you put on there and be like, this is not something that you should publish a package based on. People will still do it. Yeah.
So, what are you up to these days? What's your new day job?
I work for a healthcare IT company out of Nashville. We've been building a new product since last June, and we finally have a customer using it. So we're happy about that. Maybe my laptop that's been getting killed by the editor that shall not be named will, be replaced at some point in the near future. That'd be really cool.
Nice. So what's the product?
It's called, the company is called Roundingwell. The product that we've been working on is a platform currently customized for medication management. So there's a lot of, for really, really big hospital networks, the more consolidation there is, the less kind of this thing that happens where specialists don't talk to each other, and you'll end up with patients with like 8 or more drugs, and some of them may have side effects or complications that make it difficult to be on some of those drugs at the same time. And so our client manages a population of it's like 30,000 people, and they try to review medications for all of these people. And so the platform itself is customizable for basically any kind of healthcare thing. It's a fully HIPAA compliant patient data and demographics aggregation and analysis system. So this particular, our first implementation of this was this medication management thing. So we process all of the prescription refills for all of these patients, this 30-some-ish thousand patients. And we look at them and do some basic analysis on all the medications that patient has. And then if it meets the criteria, we flag the patient. And then they have a clinician team that looks at all of those.
It's interesting because I built a pharmacy management system a few years back, and it was for a hospital. It was the pharmacy in the hospital, so we knew all the patient's medication, and we would, when the pharmacist was going to fill the medication, we would flag it based on like side effects or overlap or whatever. So it's a similar idea, but we handled it at the pharmacist level. And they could still fill it if they chose to, but we also tried to flag it to stop them from filling it if that was going to be a problem.
Right. Yeah. And so we don't have any input at the pharmacy level. This is more just about like, looking at patients that are on a variety of different medications and then flagging them so that a clinician or nurse practitioner can look at them and say, this is a problem, or no, this is not a problem. So those specialists will then, if there is a problem, they have the ability to contact the patient and talk about it and work with the patient and work with the patient's doctor or doctors to, figure out alternative medications that won't cause additional complications. But basically same general idea. We're just kind of one step removed, I guess, from the pharmacy.
Are you like integrating with existing EMRs to do that, or how are you integrating them?
We do some of that. We don't. Our data stays in our system currently. We don't send it out to other EMRs, but we do ingest data from an EMR, to do this.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So, because you mentioned HIPAA and all that kind of stuff, like, how much extra, stuff did you have to learn to be effective with this company? Like, was HIPAA something like you kind of already knew, or did you just kind of go in not knowing much about it and just had to pick up most of the stuff that they require you to do?
No, I had never done anything that was dealt with compliance at that level. A lot of it is really common sense in terms of security and stuff that you generally shouldn't do anyways, in terms of password rotations and things like that, and having secure passwords for people that can look at patient data and logging anything that is patient data. I mean, all of that stuff is things that you would kind of expect to have an audit trail at a reasonably good company that cares about security. I think the biggest thing for me was like dealing with encryption. And so when you want to run a report on something, it's you have to start getting really creative and writing code to do reports, because everything in the database is encrypted. So you can't just go, write a fancy SQL query to generate the CSV that you need to report on. It becomes a lot more complicated. Makes it hard to look stuff up. It makes it harder to, pull some information for testing. All of those things just get a lot more complicated, because you can't very well, be like, oh, this particular patient has some weird things going on. Like, let's just grab their data and like put it on a local VM and see what's going on, because you have production encryption keys, and nobody should have production encryption keys. Like, those can't leave production servers ever. Like, yeah. So it's things like that where you're like, all the sort of dirty cowboy coding tricks that I used to be able to pull at previous companies to get stuff done really fast no longer apply. So I kind of had to learn a little bit different techniques for dealing with that stuff.
So I mean, it really probably just like slowed you down and made you kind of rethink a lot of what you kind of already knew then.
Yeah, I think that's probably accurate. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, everything seems to move a lot slower in the healthcare world. And everybody is really paranoid about getting dinged for HIPAA violations. And so, like, if you're, there's these things called BAA agreements that you have to have for transmitting data. And if you don't like self-host everything, we don't self-host anything. We use Amazon. So like there's Amazon BAA agreements. If you're shipping any sort of logging information that might expose HIPAA compliance to a third party, you have to sign a BAA agreement. And so everything is enterprise level, becomes expensive. It's not easy to be like, oh, let's just try this service. And it's like, well, does this service support HIPAA compliance? How much does it cost to get a BAA agreement with them? Like everything it's like there's 5 extra steps to everything you do in a HIPAA compliant world. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I'm making light of it a little bit, but I don't know. It just seems like it's so expensive because nobody really wants to deal with it. All these service companies that love to, advertise their flashy products. And then you're like, well, how do you feel about a BAA? And they're like, okay.
No, I'm very busy that day. Yeah. Well, I mean, I was curious when you mentioned HIPAA fines, because I had no idea. And I mean, basically for the first, there's 4 tiers, which I'm just learning. And the first 3 tiers can have a price tag up to $50,000 per violation. And then the 4th tier has a minimum of $50,000 per violation. So it makes sense that, companies are going to care about that kind of thing, because that can make or break a company pretty easily. So yep. I get it. But like, I can also imagine, trying to figure out which companies you can host with, or so I mean, like, does that stop you? Does that make it harder for like finding services like something like Cypress to test your front end or anything like that? Or is that still kind of okay ground?
No, it's okay. It's just, it comes down to whether or not you transmit patient information to them. And so we do use Cypress. We use Circle CI, we use Cypress, we use GitHub, we use AWS. We use all these services. AWS, we have to have a BAA agreement with, and we do. Amazon actually makes it pretty easy which is great. But for all the other services, it's just a matter of being like having a clear delineation between everything that is patient data and production level patient data versus just random data that we generate for testing purposes.
Which is something Amazon makes pretty easy now, at least.
Yeah.
It's pretty easy to set that line.
Yep. It makes things, like mocking and some stuff. We have to spend a fair amount of time doing mocking. At previous companies, it was we did some clever stuff like just pulling down 20,000 patient records and everything, or not patient records, customer records and everything related to those customers, and then like anonymizing the names and like zeroing out the phone numbers and email addresses and being like, well, this is good enough, and then like that just becomes our test data set. Because it's real world data, and that's like it's really useful, and we didn't have to generate it and mock it, and it has weird oddities that pop up in production and not other places. But in a HIPAA world, like we could never ever do that, and so we have to spend a lot more time generating and looking for those kind of weird edge cases that we see pop up in production, and then figuring out some way to mock it or to generate some sort of test fixture that looks something like what we saw.
So what, like, is you said you use Slim and Doctrine, and then you're also using OpenAPI for all that kind of stuff. How did you stumble on OpenAPI and like get all that integrated into your system? I mean, what was it like everyone else? We just saw Phil yelling about it, and we're like, well, we might as well do that.
A little bit. I mean, we had been using JSON API just as like kind of a standard. And then at some point, we just got really sick of doing validation rules. And so like we have a clear split between, as we're pretty standard in terms of like the PHP backend is an API, then we have a JS front end SPA. And so we just got really sick of writing the validation for it. And we were like, oh, well, there's this thing called OpenAPI. Like we should just stop doing this. And one, our front end developers will like it because they'll actually have some documentation, because there's documentation generators that make that side of it easy. And two, like if we find the right thing, like we can just use all of the validation that's in the OpenAPI document to validate every incoming request, and that tool, whatever that magical tool is, will just generate all the errors for us, and we don't ever have to deal with that nonsense, or 90% of it. And I don't know, it was just like, it was a light bulb one day that, we were just like talking about this, and I was like, oh, duh, we should be doing this. And I was like, well, there's probably no package to do it. It's going to be a pain in the butt. And I went on Packagist and I did a search, and I was like, oh my God, there's a middleware that does this. And I couldn't believe it. And I was like, okay, so there's a middleware that does it. It's probably going to be crappy. And I looked at the code and I was like, it's not crappy. It's really good. And it was just like, it was such a perfect moment of being like, yes, thank goodness there are people out there that have thought of this before. And we're not the first ones that are going to do this.
Yeah, I remember you mentioned his library, or not, I don't know if it's a him or not. You mentioned that library last year, and I remember like looking at it, and I was just like, this is incredibly cool to see, like, because, like PHP doesn't really get a whole lot when it comes to like API tooling and stuff like that. Everyone goes to JavaScript or Go, or like the most popular things I've seen on OpenAPI tools are, God fucking forbid, Java shows up once every pull requests, and we're just like, man, why do you hate yourself? But like it was cool that you highlighted like that package, because it was nice to see PHP finally coming around. Like, we can build tools with this language too. We don't just have to build websites. We can build like effective tooling for developers. And so like if that's one thing I wish more people would build, is that kind of stuff. I think that'd be super cool to have around.
For sure. And I think middleware is part of that, and it's nice to see some really useful stuff out there. You know, I'd have to go look. I don't know how big our list of middleware is right now, but I want to say it's like 12 or so. You know, so there's a lot of cool stuff out there, and I'm hoping.
What is the name of that library or that middleware?
Like the namespace starts with an H, A, something. I think we just need to have a league of extraordinary middleware packages.
That's not a bad idea at all, actually.
Oscar, our trio, has he was one of the PSR 15 members, and he very smartly claimed himself the middleware namespace on Packagist. So yeah, it's either middleware or middlewares. I can't remember. Here's the package. It's by H. Karlstrom.
Yeah.
Spelled the sort of Scandinavian way. Open API validation middleware is the name of the package, and it's really good.
There's also one sitting on the league too, an Open API PSR 7 validator, but the one there's that. There's all like the one that you shared by H. Karlstrom seems to be like the more popular one, and then also I think his name is Karsten CEBE has a PHP middleware for Open API as well. I don't know.
I just saw it. Where did it go? It looks like there's a couple more now. Yeah, so the CB1 is just it looks like a reader. Unless I'm missing, maybe there's another package.
It says read and write, but who knows?
Well, it's right, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a validator.
Yeah. You're right. I mean, so it sounds like, with Karsten's library and Karlstrom's library, those put together can create a really powerful Open API middleware layer that people could definitely start exploring.
Yep. So there's three key packages that the Open API validation middleware depends on. One of them is Karlstrom's Open API Reader, which is just a thin layer that allows you to open up a JSON or YAML file and then convert it into a PHP structure. Then there's another one under the namespace Opus, OPIS, called JSON Schema, that is a really good. It does away with the Justin Rainbow's open JSON schema. It is a replacement for that, and does a whole bunch of stuff because Justin Rainbow's package has not been updated in ages. So the Opus JSON schema is a really, really good validator. Validator. So it's the thing that gets leveraged to actually do the validation.
I wonder because Phil was just talking on Twitter the other day about JSON schema and OpenAPI getting more playing nice together a lot easier now. I wonder if that makes the Opus library kind of obsolete, or if there's still stuff in there that I haven't looked at it, so I can't totally.
No, because the OpenAPI spec is getting more similar to JSON schema. They diverged for a little while, and now they're coming back together.
Yep.
And so ultimately, the OpenAPI thing is, or the OpenAPI structure is a big document, but then when it gets to the individual parts of that document, they're essentially written in JSON schema.
Yep.
So the OpenAPI reader part is to look at the document and then pull out the JSON schema parts, and then the middleware is to take the request and the subset of the data structure and run it through the validator. And so those three packages play together to make this the validation middleware, and it's really, really good.
Nice. Very cool.
Yeah.
So, I mean, okay, we talked about all the stuff that you have done, all the projects you have killed.
Mm-hmm.
And, like the next question really is like, what project are you going to kill next?
What project am I going to kill next? Oh, man.
And can it be Laravel? No, just kidding.
No, I don't. I am not David to take down that Goliath. And I still have yet to actually build anything with Laravel. I've done a little bit of dev stuff and like played around with it a little bit. But I've never actually like built a production project with Laravel. That's not going to be the one that I kill. I don't know. I'm not really involved with any projects right now that seem like they should be killed.
Yeah, I mean, so to rephrase my question to a more PG version, like, what do you feel like is like? What do you feel like your path is leading you onto next? Like, I mean, you've been involved in massive major open source projects. You've been involved with leading spec development, which is a huge thing for a lot of people. And so it seems like, like every single step you've taken like a really big step forward. And so I'm kind of curious, I mean, obviously you don't really know where life is going to take you, but like, if you had your choice of like, where would you want to get involved next if you had control?
Yeah. It's all, I mean, the secret is, Matt, it's all accidental and I'm just a dabbler. So, I mean, I really have no idea. I
mean, there's no
I feel like maybe, stuff with Lambda is super interesting. And I feel like there might be, it's like just starting to gain some traction in terms of adoption. And as one of those early adopters at my current company, I feel like that might be maybe what happens next.
Yeah. And so, I mean, we talked about it a little bit at the beginning, depending on
when live. Yeah.
Well, it depends on if the editor leaves it in or not. Like, I don't know how Ben does this. When I ship off the APIs You Won't Hate podcast, I'm just like, just do your magic. Then I end up uploading the wrong one and we get yelled at. But like, so you did mention your team is working with serverless and stuff like that, and you're using Bref, right?
Correct.
So how is that working out for you right now? Like, is it? I've heard a lot about it. I know I don't know how to say his name, so I'm not even going to try and butcher it, even though I know it's close to mine. But I'm pretty sure I saw Rob Allen talking about it a fair bit as well, and he had really good things to say about it. So
it's, I mean, it's fucking magic. I don't really understand what it actually does. Every time I look at the source code, I'm like,
well, that's what all Laravel developers say too. So.
I mean, the thing is, it's not so much about the source code. It's about the magic. The hidden magic thing about Bref is the layers that Mateo builds. And I don't really understand at a deep level. I really don't understand how AWS Lambda works at all. But the layers, the Bref layers that he builds basically make it possible to use PHP like you do JavaScript on AWS, which is absolutely mind-blowing to me, and really cool. And it works, like it just works. I don't know.
Are you using it more like a Lambda style, or are you using it like to invoke Slum, or how are you using it?
We use it a couple different ways. We use it as like an invocation for SNS or SQS. I always get those two mixed up, whichever one it is. Like, so we invoke it at like in an event style. We also use it just as an API, like standard Lambda layer, where like people start using, one of our clients start using the our service, and Lambda just takes over and does its thing. Yeah.
Nice. Is like the whole thing running in Lambdas, or do you have some Lambdas and some EC2 or whatever?
We have 0 EC2. The only thing that we have persistent right now is we have an RDS database. And the only reason that we have an RDS database and not a serverless database is because the Postgres lags behind MySQL. And we use Postgres. And so they just, in the last, I don't know, month or two, finally said that serverless Postgres is ready for production.
Nice.
So we will probably move over to that too, in which case our whole stack for our new service will be 100% serverless.
That's cool. Has it been smooth doing that with PHP, or do you like wish you would have done JavaScript instead, or how's the process been?
There are sometimes that
This is the town hall. You don't have to filter yourself.
Yeah, I know. I mean, there are times when it's like, yeah, maybe JavaScript would be a little bit better. The ecosystem is more mature when it comes to certain things. But at the same time, I feel like for what we want to do in terms of having a really robust, highly type safe, well-tested backend that can actually be like enterprise ready, because everything in the medical world has to be enterprise ready. I think PHP is probably a better choice for that.
I think just that statement says a lot about how PHP has grown, right? Like you said, we want like a well-tested, type-safe backend that's enterprise ready. Like a few years back, you would never have put PHP into that sentence.
Right. Yep. And I mean, we've been on PHP 7.2. Now we're on 7.4. So, the type safe part of that is, I mean, before we actually had a production client, we were on PHP 7.4. So we have, as much as you can be type safe in PHP, we are, and it's great. I mean, our static analysis tools have caught a number of things before we even merged a pull request. So
that's really fucking nice.
Yeah.
So I guess let's wrap this up with where can people find you, online or in person? So we talked, I think, before we hit broadcast that I'll be at Midwest in 2 months, or is that next month? It's next month now. And you're out that way.
I am, yeah. I think I will be at Midwest PHP in person. That seems pretty likely right now. You can find me on Twitter and GitHub as Shadowhand, and most other places. Shadowhand.com is my personal website. There's not a ton of information there, but some links to other places that you can find me.
What's up with that handle, by the way?
I don't know. I've had it since I was like 17 years old, and I like it, and so I kept it.
That's fair. All right, cool. Thanks for coming on, Woody. It was fun.
Yeah.
Thank you. It was great. It was awesome to catch up with you.
Thanks for letting me ramble, and cheers.
Cheers.